Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's Kevin and welcome to my channel, The Art of Horror. Today I'll be doing my best to try and show you how to draw a human skull. Or at least the way I go about it anyway. This tutorial is just meant to give you some rough guidelines, especially on the proportions of a skull. I do believe developing your own style is very important. Whenever I draw a skull, I always start with drawing an oval shape, not a perfect circle, a rough oval shape, almost like an egg shape, which is actually the shape of a human skull. So I always start by penciling in just a slightly squashed circle, I would call it. I'm going to be drawing two skulls for you today. One I'll be drawing on a 3/4 angle, which you can actually apply to both sides, left and right. And the other I'll be doing from a front view. Maybe in the future I will also move on and show you how to draw skulls looking up and down as well. So to start with, this skull will be a 3/4 view looking to my left. Or in the skull's point of view, looking to his right. So after drawing a very rough squashed circle, the next phase is drawing a center line, which is showing me the angle that the skull is actually looking on. In this case it's a 3/4 view, so I try and follow the shape of the circle that I've just drawn, and this marks the center line of the skull itself. After drawing in the center line, I can then work out exactly where the eye sockets are going to be. In this case, the right eye of course is more squashed than the left eye, as it is on the 3/4 view. Once you've worked out the placement of the eyes, you can work out where the nasal bridge and the nasal cavity are going to go as well. Working out where the nasal cavity's gone, you can then move on to where the cheekbones go. Once again, don't be afraid to work with the pencil like you're working with clay. Don't be afraid of mistakes, especially when practicing. You'll see as I go on, I make loads of mistakes whilst I'm doing this, and I just ignore them, which is the best advice any artist has ever given me. Once I've roughed out the cheekbones, I can also add the temporal bones as well, those bits around the eye sockets. And I can start moving on to the upper mouth bone as well, which of course holds the upper teeth. Now humans have 32 teeth. Now I never actually count when I'm doing the teeth, I just generally go for what feels and looks right. I also don't tend to draw every individual tooth, I just try and give the impression of each tooth. Once again, roughing it out, not being afraid to make mistakes, working it until it gets the feel right of how the teeth should look. It's at this point I realise that the skull itself I've drawn isn't quite big enough to accommodate the rest of the picture that I'm creating. So I just go along and I make the skull bigger. I don't worry about rubbing it out at this stage, I don't worry about the mistake, I just go with it and I just play with it until it feels like it's about the right size. Moving on to the lower teeth. The lower teeth of course are quite a lot smaller than the upper teeth, which in itself can create a bit of a problem when you're trying to line the teeth up. So once again, you play with the drawing until you get the feel of it right, not trying to draw every individual tooth necessarily. Now that I've roughed out the lower teeth, I can actually start working on the lower mandible, and once again I will just play with this until it actually sits right. As you can see, to start with, I don't like the result that I get, but I'm not afraid to make a mistake, and it gives me a good starting off point until I get the lower mandible looking how I like to get it to look. Also realising at the same time the skull wasn't quite the right shape still, so I readjusted again. As you can see, there's multiple lines where I've readjusted the skull and it's grown in size as I've gone along. Once I'm happy with the shape, I just use an eraser to clean up the picture just a little bit, and that will give me a good guiding place for when I want to use the pen or charcoals after that. It'll also make the picture easier if I want to put it on a light table, and just cleans up the image in general. I just switched to a fine line Sharpie at this point. I think it's a 0.04. This will just help me solidify the image and give it more definition. in preparation for the shading. Don't forget, in the middle of your nasal cavity there is a nasal septum. It's a line or a bone. It's mostly cartilage, but there is a bit of bone there that runs down the middle of the nasal cavity, so don't forget to add that as well. I also take the opportunity at this point, while I'm using the black pen, to add in the gaps in the mandible, as of course it's not all one solid piece. These are the places where the muscle attaches to the bone. And of course the skull doesn't have any muscles, so there must be a gap there. Once again, I'm not being too fussy with the teeth. I'm not trying to draw every individual tooth. I'm more trying to give an impression of each individual tooth here. And I switch over to a thicker Sharpie for any larger black areas. Moving on to the second skull, this is the front facing one. Once again, I do a bit of a squashed circle. It's not a perfect circle. It's squashed a teeny bit into an oval shape. So it's not a perfect circle. The bottom of this circular shape is actually the guide of where you put the eye sockets. A mistake a lot of people make when they go to draw a skull is after they draw a circular shape, they put the eye sockets and the rest of the face way too high up within the circle, whereas the bottom of the circle is actually where the face begins. If you're actually doing an anatomically correct picture of a human face, one with skin on it, this bottom of the circle is actually, that's where the top of the ear actually begins. But in this case, of course, we don't have to worry about the skin. Once again, once I've worked out where the eye sockets go, it dictates to me where the nasal cavity and the cheekbones go after that. Don't forget, your cheekbones also run into the temporal bone, the bones at the side of the eye socket. At this point, of course, I can start working on the upper mandible and the upper teeth. Once again, not being too fussy about how it looks and using my pencil to work and not be afraid of those mistakes. And once I've done the upper mandible, of course, I can then move on to the lower mandible and lower teeth once again. Remembering that the teeth are actually on a curved plane, so they're not all the same size. The teeth furthest to the left and right you can only see partially, while the teeth in the front, of course, you can see the whole tooth. Using the pencil as a rough guide, I then come in with the Sharpie again just to give myself clarity of image. And please, if you like these images, don't be afraid to copy them exactly to start with until you start working out your own style. The best way to learn is to copy somebody else's work. I myself started out copying Derek Riggs's work from the Iron Maiden posters, probably when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I would draw these images over and over and over again, until eventually I could actually draw Eddie from Iron Maiden from any angle that I so pleased. So do feel free to copy my image exactly. It's there to learn. But once you build up a little bit of confidence, don't be afraid to start straying from the path and trying to make up your own images, of course. Copying is never a bad thing. Copying something and then claiming that you've drawn it for yourself, though, that's a whole nother ball game. So whenever you do copy an image, always say that you've copied that image. Never try pass it off as your own. It's how we all learn as artists. Whilst I'm not using any referencing at all here, the referencing is all in my mind at the moment, and I've drawn so many skulls and copied so many pictures of skulls that I can actually have a whole library at my disposal in the back of my brain, ready to use and ready to go at any time, which is what it's all about. Now I've clarified the image using the Sharpie pens, I can move on to what I consider the fun part, which brings the pictures to life, and that is the shading. Now I'm not going to go into shading too much this video, and I think that's a good subject for a future video. But just so you know, in this instance, I'm pretty much going on the fact that the light source is coming from the front of the image. And for the shading in this case, I'll be using a soft charcoal pencil. Because the light source is coming from the front, I'm just trying to shade away from the dark lines at this point. Adding more pressure towards the line and less, of course, as it moves away from the line. I also use this opportunity to add in any small details that I may have missed in the original sketch. Skulls quite often aren't perfect things, and whilst I didn't put them in this video, there are holes in skulls where nerves attach, like through the cheekbones, and also there's cracks in the cranium where you used to be a baby and your cranium grew together, and those cracks still exist. So depending on how detailed you want to get, that's up to you. Of course, finding pictures of real skulls is a really good way to learn how to do this as well. As I work the charcoals, I'm trying to imagine in my mind the skull as a three-dimensional object, and I'm trying to imagine the way the light would bend around such a three-dimensional object. I see this as a mistake a lot of people make with their pictures. They're not actually seeing what they're drawing as a 3D object in their mind, and being able to imagine what it would look like if you could pick it up and move it around is a great help artistically. Whilst I didn't draw in the brow ridge, say, I know in my mind that's the shape of the skull, so I actually start including and working out the way the ridge of the brow actually looks as I'm going along here. And once again, same thing with the 3/4 view skull. I try and imagine it as a three-dimensional object in my mind and what it would look like with the light shining on it. Using pressure closer to the lines and working my way out and using less and less pressure as I get away from the lines. Remember, above and below human teeth as well, the bone is actually bent to accommodate for the tooth to fit in. So don't forget to add those ridges to where the teeth actually attach to the skull. And finally, and this is probably the main reason besides looking quite creepy while I wear the rubber gloves, when I use charcoals a lot, it stops your fingers getting quite dirty, and because they have an eraser-like quality to them as well, I can now blend and smooth the charcoal that I've just added to the picture, which actually gives it a really nice effect. You still have to greatly think about the way that you're rubbing the picture as well. You can totally stuff the picture up if you do this the wrong way. You have to think about how you're using your finger. If your finger's getting too dirty, I switch to another finger as well, because you might be transferring too much of the charcoal medium. So generally for one picture, I will switch between several fingers as I go along and smooth the shape out. If you watch what I'm doing with my hands, I'm working my way out in the direction that I want the dark to light to travel. I hope I've been some help with you on your journey to draw a human skull. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be happy to help you out as much as I can. If you're new to my channel and you would like to see more videos like this from me, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Good luck to all of you on your artistic journey. Have fun drawing your skulls. This has been Kevin for The Art of Horror. Until next time, goodbye from me.